Chapter 19, Rico's Way, January 1999. Spookio was awake and he was thinking. There was nothing to do but think, and anyways, he had plenty to think about. Stretched across his bunk in the isolation section of the Monterey County Jail, the only things to look at were the lamp, the ceiling, the stainless steel toilet, and the creamy lemon walls. He made up his mind. He stood, walked a few steps to the metal door, and bent until his face was level with the food slot. There was enough of a crack so his voice could be heard by the man in the next cell over. And that man was Rico. They only had a week till the Shorty murder trial, and it was time to conversate. He called out to Rico. He told him he was going to take the deal. His voice bounced in small echoes between concrete and steel. Prosecutors had offered him 40 years. Then came back with 33. He was ready to jump on it. For a first degree 187 and one attempted, it wasn't bad. His lawyer, a burly public defender named Bob Hatcher, hoped he'd pounce on the deal. Spookio was barely 21 years old, and he'd have lots of years ahead, lots of good years ahead. In his 50s, shit, he could have more kids and start life all over. He could come out and still be there for his daughter, who was only 2 when all this bullshit went down. Rico didn't congratulate him on his decision to take the deal. Instead, he reminded his subordinate that they had the welfare of the familia to consider. The bosses needed Spookio to smoke out witnesses and informants. Someone had to sacrifice and go to trial. It was the only way to flush out the cops' methods. And really, the prosecutor's deal wasn't much better than the 45 to life he might get at trial anyway. Who knows, he might be acquitted. Spookio was obligated to roll the dice. It was only natural that important men such as Rico and Lobo should take plea deals. For his sacrifice, Rico promised Spookio he would at last achieve his dream. He'd be pulled into the NF and made a carnal. Spookio felt crushed, but he couldn't say no. To do so would be an act of treason. He convinced himself he wanted to see Mo on the stand, looking scared as shit. They'd known each other since they were kids, and he introduced Mo to his girl and his daughter, a gesture signifying the deepest respect. Mo's betrayal stung like nothing he'd ever felt. Fuck Mo. Make him sweat. Make him show his face in court. And so, calling out to the walls through a food slot, Spookio agreed to go through the full trial. It was settled. At least, he would finally become a carnal. The bargain was the best arrangement for all concerned, and he tried to push his daughter out of his mind. The day jury selection started, Spookio went to court committed to his new mission, armed with the knowledge that something historic would take place. It wasn't just the trial that morning. Rico told him he was working to recruit an individual willing to slip inside the courthouse. The homeboy was going to shoot Mo right in front of the judge, the jury, the press, and the world. Of course, the bailiffs would immediately draw their guns and blast the shooter off the planet. But it was reassuring to know there were guys as seriously committed to the cause as he was, and it gave Spookio the heart to carry on. If he was still on the streets, he thought he would gladly do the deed. Mo sat in the witness stand. On the big morning, deputies had escorted their witnesses into the courtroom through back doors and hallways where they believed no attacker could get them. This performance was the culmination of a year of work that had turned Mo's life inside out. Just a few more hours and he would at last slip into ordinariness, taking his first steps towards living like other men, content to raise kids and take care of wives and mothers in near anonymity. The bailiffs kept a nervous watch on Spookio. Security was at the highest level Monterey County courts had ever seen. In addition to an extra crew of bailiffs, the court was supplied with a team of plainclothes cops. Spookio's lawyers had fought for his right to appear before the jury without wrist shackles and ankle chains. Prosecutors painted him as a cold-blooded killer and insisted if he couldn't be chained, he should be restrained by an electronic stun belt that would instantly drop him if he tried to pull any moves against the star witness. His lawyers argued that this would prejudice the jury. Finally, Spookio won the right to appear as most criminal defendants do, in decent street clothes with no cuffs, chains, belts, or restraining equipment to make him look like a shackled beast. But the judge said the plainclothes cops had to stay. Spookio wondered if the shooter had made it into the building. They discussed sneaking him into the back hall behind the judge's bench. where he could hit Mo on the way in, but they decided entering the courtroom through the front door was so much simpler. No one obvious sat in the audience. There were a couple reporters and lawyers, Regina and a shitload of plainclothes who didn't have anyone fooled. In the podium sat Mo, testifying his traitorous heart out. It was now or never. So where the fuck was the shooter? The fluorescent rods in the ceiling flickered. Spukio looked around. Everyone hushed. The lights flickered again. The cops glanced upward and stiffened. Bailiff Vince Erlin, who stood near the wall, quickly whispered into his radio that all court deputies should brace for a power outage. Then the courtroom went completely dark. "Everybody stay where you are," Erlin shouted. Officers tried to swarm towards Spukio, but no one could see a thing. Bailiffs raced down the halls from all directions, aware that the notorious Spukio could be anywhere, unrestricted by chains or a stun belt. Erlin ran to protect Mo in a motion born out of pure instinct. Spukio's instincts were just as powerful, and he jumped to his feet, prepared to lunge at Mo and do whatever was required to take him out, choke him, bash his head. The cops groped in the darkness. Then their hands found parts of Spukio and more hands held him, restrained his limbs wherever and however they could. For a split second, he kept going forward as if propelled by some force of destiny, but then he slackened while his heart raced ahead of him. With Erlin's body serving as the shield, police detectives and FBI agents held the witness quickly, stepped down from the stand. As a unit, they shuffled blindly toward the hall behind the judge's bench. There the cluster stood and waited, officers praying their Kevlar-covered torsos were enough to protect Mo from unseen threats. More seconds passed, and they listened in the blackness for any sound that resembled an approach. Silence, waiting, silence. The lights flickered on. All eyes turned to Mo. He was breathing and blinking with no razor slice on his neck. He was fine. Though it seemed to some people that other forces were at work, the bailiffs agreed it must have been a fluke power shortage. Deputies searched the courtroom and found nothing treacherous. Then, with all eyes on Spukio, they cautiously walked Mo back in. For the jury, the spectators, the bailiffs, and Mo, the blackout was a harrowing brush with terror. For the gang, it was a missed opportunity. Mo finished his testimony, and the prosecution side felt a great burden lift. When the judge asked if the witness could be dismissed, Spukio gestured to his attorney. They bowed heads and whispered. The attorney asked the judge to hold over the witness until the next morning so they could recross-examine him. The judge agreed. The prosecution and Mo's handlers fretted. That night in their isolation cells, Spukio called out to Rico with the good news. He'd personally made sure Mo was forced to show up in court one more time. Tomorrow was their last chance to hit him good. But to his utter disappointment, Spukio learned the great courtroom assassination was not to be. Like everything else that happened around Rico, the opportunity vanished just as the gang was on the brink of making history. "We didn't have the manpower out there," Spukio would later say, "and anybody was willing to go, actually, to do what we call kamikaze. The most hardcore ends in Salinas, the ones truly committed to dying for the cause, were all caught up in this case, which meant they were either in the Monterey County Jail or a hospital." The trial dragged as testimony and evidence mounted to crush Spukio. The gang's spies learned all about the taped calls and the transmitters in the wire room, how the FBI and the cops had followed their every move right up to the moment Spukio killed Shorty. On the slow days, Spukio's heart caught in his throat when he turned his head and saw his girlfriend in the gallery, and sometimes he'd spot Rico's old lady Regina silently lending a smile of support. Spukio was, of course, found guilty. Okay, he thought, he'd take his 30 or 40 or whatever to life. But when the judge came back with 103 years, backed by 4 life sentences, his brain imploded. The numbers were unreal, impossible. How do you begin to count such a term? 4 25 to life bids, plus 3 more years for some bullshit. Whatever, it didn't matter. He would never get out, never. At sentencing, they were all in the courtroom together. Rico, on the other hand, had cut himself quite a deal. All his murder and conspiracy charges were dropped in the furtherance of justice. he copped to 2 counts of attempted murder on Copas with the gang and gun enhancements. Even after being caught on tape as the mastermind behind the whole plot, his sentence was only 22 years with no life, which meant he'd have a shot at parole after 19. Kermit and Chachi got 15 years each. Chente took a deal for 9. Fish got 3. Everyone copped a sweet deal. Everyone except Spooky-O. When the guards led Rico away, Spooky-O mouthed one question to him. Why? It was over. He knelt on his chair as the bailiffs manacled his ankles. Then he stood and they cuffed his hands behind his back. For the first time in the whole ordeal, his knees nearly buckled. It was only in that moment that he actually understood he'd never hold his daughter again. In a final stab at the heart, Rico did not pull Spooky-O into the NF. He seemed to forget he made the promise. Spooky-O wrote a complaint and sent it up the chain of command to the generals in Pelican Bay. He reported that his bosses had known they were being followed by the cops. After all, they got pulled over on their way to kill Lisa Rocha that night. And yet, they went forward with activity that exposed and endangered the familia. It was unprofessional, and Spooky-O thought the Bay should know about it. However, until the letter's claims were finally investigated by the brass, the letter and investigation gave Rico one more excuse to put Spooky-O's membership on hold. Spooky-O rode a jail bus to the reception center prison in Delano, where for the first time in his short life, a despair like no other engulfed him. His girlfriend broke up with him, and with her, his remaining slice of family slipped away, and his criminal career also fucking nowhere now that Rico had hung him out to dry. During the worst of times in foster care or YA or adult prison, he never thought of giving up. But what was the point of living now? And yet something, his baby's daughter's face floating at the edge of his consciousness, would not let him walk away from life. Something told him miracles still existed, and in ways he had yet to figure out, all this would change.